Rules Coordinator, the Energy Facility Siting Council, and we are here on this fine February 26th, 2026 to have the second RAC meeting for the Compliance Rulemaking Advisory Committee. And I'm going to actually click the Present in Teams button so you can see what I'm talking about. There we go. Let me know if anybody cannot see that slide. Hearing nothing, I'm seeing some thumbs up. Let's go ahead and get started. So just a reminder, we have a pretty small-ish group, and I think almost everybody's here today. But I will be, as you know, recording this, and I'm also going to try sending out an AI recap of the meeting, which Microsoft has now started generating for us, which can be really handy. It does a very good job of identifying all the things that are discussed, who said what. Takes better notes than I ever could. So we'll see how that goes. So we are, this is only our second RAC meeting. I don't anticipate us meeting too many more times, and maybe one more time as we'll see, although I'm open to however the RAC wants to proceed. But we pretty much just went over the scope and objectives during the first RAC and talked about the compliance program and discussed some preliminary issues that people had. And this RAC is going to be pretty straightforward. We are going to just go over the preliminary issues that were discussed, and then we're going to dive into the issues that sort of staff has identified, along with some sort of preliminary solutions that we're thinking would be appropriate for resolving those issues. And then I'm going to, and if anybody has any thoughts or ideas, this is a great time to bring them up. I'm not intending to just talk at you for however long this takes to get through. So yes, feel free to just, stick your hand up, whatever, and give us your 2 cents or your 10 cents, because we don't have the penny anymore. Anyway, yeah. So, and then we'll see how long that takes us, and there'll be time for, I don't think there's any members of the public on, but there'll be a few minutes at the end there if anybody from the public is present who wants to add anything. So here we are here just at the beginning with the preliminary issues. We only had really a couple. I'm just going to go through these one by one, but the first one here was sort of, and there's some overlap with some other issues, but clarifying where possible duplicative EFSC compliance oversight. So this is sort of a complicated issue the more you dive into it, but essentially there are some issues that come into play with this where an applicant or certificate holder will rely on compliance with federal regulations as evidence of meeting council standards. And in those cases, the compliance team is going to look to meeting those federal regulations as evidence, because that was the evidence that was provided for meeting certain compliance requirements. But that's not to say that the council or the compliance team or the department is interested in sort of the actual implementation of the compliance with those regulations. So we're not looking to sort of duplicate the compliance effort. It would be more of you would just share your compliance evidence that you receive from, whatever federal regulatory oversight is actually involved with that particular regulation. So, but we are sensitive to the issue of duplicative work. And this sort of was related to the second issue here on this slide, which is to clarify, state versus federal requirements and clean up, federal references. This is something that staff had already kind of identified, where it sort of looks like council is assigning itself the duty of ensuring compliance with federal regulations. And, it's sort of like, there's all sorts of rules and regulations that we're expecting people to abide by. Like, we could have the umbrella is so broad that it'd be like we would expect you to obey the speed limit when you're driving, your vehicles on at the site. But the council's not putting themselves in charge of making sure that people are obeying the speed limit. So similarly, to the extent there are regulations that need to be followed, um, the way the rules are currently drafted, it sort of looks like council's putting itself as an oversight for those, but it does not wish to do that, and so we are going to try to clean that up. But you can see how it's sort of related to the first issue, um, but they're not quite the same issue. And let's see. The next item here. Any questions or any thoughts about this first one before we move on? We're gonna no, okay. To be
Sorry,
honest, going.
I do have
Oh,
I do have
yeah,
a
go ahead.
question. This
Sure.
is Lena Cope with Portland General Electric. Have you contemplated how removal of those federal references in Division 26 would impact site certificates that mimic that language that we already have that say thou shalt comply with federal rules when that's outside of EFSC jurisdiction?
Um, that's a great question, and it's sort of hold on one second. Someone is at the door. My dog needs to see. There you go, dog. Um, yeah, we're going to be looking at that sort of on a case by case basis, because we do care about compliance of federal regulations if that was relied on as being evidence of compliance with council standards. But there's just sort of like blanket language in the rules right now where they're like the certificate holder is expected to obey all applicable federal and state rules and regulations. um Great, but like that doesn't need to be in there because it's sort of like obviously there's an expectation that you're going to obey all of the laws and regulations, but that's not something that the compliance team or the compliance program is going to be like monitoring or observing, except in cases where that compliance, as particular compliance, was relied on by the applicant, or when they were originally showing, we meet this council standard because we're going to comply with the following. So, but yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
So
I
it'd be
guess
more dealt with
when we
in
share some draft
how.
language, yeah, you might get that a little bit better.
Okay.
Yeah, and this is Sarah Esterson with the department. Um, Lena, because do you know this is coming from 34502600015 sub 3. Are you familiar with whether that, because I'm not, but have we imposed that verbatim in any of PGE site certificates?
I think so.
Okay.
I don't know that reference off the top of my head.
Right.
I thought
Yeah,
I had
it's
the rules open earlier, but I do think like that language has just verbatim been copied over to site certificates.
okay. Because
And so
Division 26 kind of is weird. But yeah, and because we have another one in Division 25 that is kind of like it, but it's like you shall comply with all applicable permit requirements of other state agencies, but that's different than this one
that's
over here in
different, yeah.
26 that refers to federal. So yeah, I mean, I guess the question there, Tom, too, we'll run into it several times, I think, but it's of like whether we say this supersedes, if we make a change, this change then supersedes any conditions that are in conflict, or it retroactively applies to any site certificates. I think that is something we should think about if we do that. And I mean, at least, I have seen some instances where compliance officers would make compliance observations about federal requirements that are outside of the site certificate. And I think that makes us nervous. That's not our place or our expertise. So anytime we can kind of stay in our lane, I think the better.
Exactly.
Okay, thanks.
Great questions though. And applicability of updated rules is always an issue for all of our rulemakings. I do think some more so than others. And I think this one will be sort of in the middle. It definitely is something that we want to consider, be thoughtful about, but it's not going to be, it's not like we're updating the council standards themselves, um, you know, where retroactivity could be like a big deal, or it could, modify, how the facility needs to operate or require new like compliant conditions or something like that. Most of these changes, even to the extent they can be considered substantive, I think will be, the intent is that we're making things clear, easy to understand, easier for the compliance team to follow, and even if they might, you know, involve some initial upfront work by certificate holder, the goal is that that's just preventing further work down the road, and overall it would be less burdensome to follow, if that makes sense. That's the goal anyway. Okay, so the next issues that were identified, sort of like, oh, this was from Dugan, who's unfortunately not here today. But he was like, hopefully we can, to the extent we added additional rule text to sort of deal with this, not just add regulatory cruft, but that's something that we always think about as well. And then the last one, a big one that was from that first meeting was creating rules that were more clear about pre-construction compliance, which is, I guess, there was a feeling that the current rules are sort of underserving that part of the compliance process. So let's go through now. We're going to shift gears a little bit. We've been working on this for over a year now, and we have sort of a list of issues that some of which overlap a little bit. And there's not that many, and they're not. I don't think these are going to be too crazy or blow anybody's minds or anything. But I'm curious to see what people think about sort of these issues, and then we have sort of some proposals for most of these in terms of how we feel like they're best addressed, and some of them are very straightforward, and others are going to be a little more complex. But yeah, well, let's get to it without any further ado. So the first one here, this is something, yeah, it's right in line with what had kind of already been identified at the RAC. We'd already started even looking at, this was more straightforward, just anywhere it says that the applicant or the certificate holder shall comply with all applicable lawful rules and requirements of federal agencies, and it's not directly related to like evidence or anything that the certificate holder relied on, we're just going to take that out, because there's no reason for blanket statements like these to be in the compliance rules. They serve really no function, and other than potential introduction of confusion about the role of the council in terms of compliance operations. Any questions about that one? I think this is pretty straightforward. Okay, so this next one is relating to pre-construction compliance plans and the commencement notification. So right now, we have existing compliance plan requirements, obviously, that we require applicants to submit. But we're thinking about adding additional language in here that would help people understand about like what they need to do with respect to the pre-construction phase, and when how the commencement notification starts, and how that ties into the certificate start deadline. So this is just nothing crazy. This is just sort of cleaning this up a little bit and making it hopefully a little bit easier to understand. Any thought? Oh, go ahead.
Just, is there any, this is, when it comes to pre-construction compliance, it's a very practical, get the list out, understand each of the conditions. Is there anything, any example that either you or Sarah might be able to provide as what this sort of might look like? There's words on the page, and then we'll see words, but I'm just trying to, if there's any examples of how it might either streamline or what you're meaning at the end of the day, that would help me on this particular one, because it's already quite complex. I'll just say from where I'm coming from. Pre-construction is, it's a massive list. You're trying to work through all of these things at the same time. On our side, you're trying to get your your construction crews ready, train them, make sure, and it's not the simplest and the easiest thing to keep track of. So if there's any example that might help me understand what you're trying to achieve here.
Mhm.
Sarah, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, you want to let Andy ask his question and then maybe we can answer?
Sure. Go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, the only thing that I would add is let's just make sure that that this language doesn't prevent the ability for certificate holders to phase
Right.
construction.
No. Yeah, no changes there.
Okay.
In fact,
That's a
I think
big-
we might be trying to, well, maybe
Make it
that's
easier?
the modernization is making clear that things can be, which is another rulemaking that things can be phased.
Yeah.
No, well, I think we are actually, as part of this,
In other places. Okay.
introducing the word phase to this rule. So that I think part of this is, and maybe I should have added this slide, but yeah, clarifying that phasing is, a potential.
The one thing I'll add there too is maybe this is probably just another thing that needs to be added to this, and Sarah and I have worked this out in the past, is clarification as to when, from a pre-construction perspective, when the carbon credits need to be paid.
Mm-hmm.
I think that would be good to have in writing for everybody's benefit so that we're not having to have negotiations and documentation between site certificate holders and ODO staff to get that on the books.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to me, that is more of like a CO2 standard clarification place, but because
Yeah.
it's so specific, but I hear you. So David, I think if I'm understanding you correctly, so if I don't know if you're looking at the rule, but 345.026.0048 compliance plans, it says today certificate holders shall implement a plan that verifies compliance with all site certificate terms and conditions. And that's it. I mean, there's more, but not specific to the compliance plan. And, in practice, we're like, okay, the plan is your site certificate put into an Excel, and then hopefully there's a way to screen pre-construction, construction, and operations so that you can demonstrate compliance by phase. But even the way this is written, you shall implement a plan that verifies compliance. It just doesn't. So we're trying to make the words of this rule align with how it actually works. And I think that we're just adding clarifying language and to say, you can provide a narrative, but for conditions that require a level of evidence, you might have to provide that documentation. So, the example is really the experience you've had. It's just been difficult to kind of adjust from where we started. I think maybe 10 years ago, which was still the same site certificate loaded into Excel, but then most of the conditions, the compliance demonstration was something like, we will. We understand. Noted.
The plan is to do it.
And so we're more and more like, not for all conditions. Some are too broad, like you shall comply with all, state and local requirements. We don't say you now have to detail out what that means outside of everything we've just reviewed in permitting. Not that, but that we're actually, again, just clarifying the rule to make it clear it's not some promise for the future of broad language. It's evidentiary where appropriate, and that's it.
Okay.
So yeah, not making it more than your experience to date, just aligning the words with
Yeah, you
what's
might already be
happening
doing
in
this.
practice.
But that's
Well-
not because it's required by the rules as the way
Or
it's
clear
being
in the rule.
explained.
We believe
Yeah.
it aligns with the rule. It's just not clear.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll take a look at that. It's
Absolutely.
Lena? Or is it? It's Lena
Lena.
or Lena?
Lena,
Okay, sorry.
Lena to
Thank-
you, Tom.
Yeah.
thank you for asking. I think maybe this is also kind of a shift over when I first started working on site certificates to what I think I might have heard Odo say on a non-PG related project, but the definition of beginning construction, in my mind, when we needed to prove, like if work had occurred on site and we needed to prove that it was under 250,000, I always thought that 250,000 was kind of like a prove that you did not exceed the 250,000 prior to meeting all of your pre-construction requirements. And then we haven't just, and then that that's okay. But I feel like I heard in another meeting that basically Odo will not consider us starting construction until we have spent $250,000. And I don't know if that should be clarified in the rules one way or the other, about how that 250,000 is applied.
Hmm.
So I think the current thinking was to tie, because there is currently a reference to a definition for construction in the rules now, but the reference in the rules now is to a definition in 3451 10, which doesn't exist anymore. I mean, that rule does, but the definition for construction doesn't. So we were already going to, at a minimum, put in a reference to ORS 469-306, which states that construction means work performed on a site, excluding surveying, exploration, or other activities to define or characterize the site, the cost of which exceeds 250,000. So, I mean, I don't know what we can do beyond that. That wouldn't require, yeah. Is that
Yeah, that's fine.
okay? Yeah. So we're not. Yeah, the way the rules are drafted right now, they don't tie into that statute, but they will.
But they will. Okay.
Yeah. Or at least that's what we're going to propose. Okay. Any other thoughts on this one? All right. So this one is not too crazy. So we just want to make it more clear about how somebody from the public would request for EFSC to perform a site inspection, by sort of delineating the information that would be helpful. Because right now it's sort of vague on what would, the process, and also sort of like what is allowed, I guess. We don't really get a bunch of these. Sarah, I don't know, do we get any?
Have we ever received requests for inspection?
Yeah.
But a handful.
Yeah. So not like this isn't like a big
Yeah.
deal, but
Mhm.
it is pretty vague right now. So I think it would be helpful to at least make this process that exists, more easily understood. Yeah. So okay. And just because somebody does submits a request, we'll review every request we get. It doesn't necessarily mean we're going to get in a car and drive out to the site. I mean, we might, but we do review all of those requests as they come in. Okay. This next one here is sort of a longer one. It's actually going to be on 2 slides here, but doing a sort of, I wouldn't say significant rewrite, but adding some additional details to the reporting requirements rule here in 80. Defining what beginning of operation means. Updating the annual report content requirements to indicate we want supporting documentation. And this is all stuff like we would need anyway, but it's not clear in the rules that we would. So the hope is that it will be more, by adding this additional language, it'll be more clear about what we already sort of wanted. including a requirement about facility modifications so that we can have a better sense of like what is actually on site at any given moment. If components are heavily significantly modified or removed altogether. And then continuing on, adding, a component description table to the report, adding a geospatial information requirement to the report. And then to the extent that something is needed in the report that's already sort of included in a specific condition, just removing it so that there isn't duplicity. We're not asking for the same thing in two different places. Lena.
Me again.
I just had to think
adding-
about your name for a second.
Adding geospatial information to the annual reports? Or, I mean, that seems like that's something that's like as part of pre-construction or pre-operational or something along those, but to require
Sure,
geospatial information every year? Is that the intent?
I think that to the extent that things haven't changed at all, I mean, that's a Control C, Control V or whatever. So, I mean, I guess it's more of just affirming that things haven't changed or whatever.
And if it has, provide new geospatial information.
Yes.
Okay.
Andy.
I guess clarification on geospatial information, because that's sort of a security concern. Are you asking for GIS data for mapping software that's going to be available to the public?
I guess I defer to Sarah on that one.
Yes, is the answer, but
that's going to pose concerns for those of us that have to operate under TSA regulations.
Right.
Just
right.
as a heads up. So
Yeah.
I recommend that you guys review the TSA regulations, because it's, we typically do not hand out our geospatial data for pipeline facilities or any of our other infrastructure.
I mean, and it's certainly possible that that's why we're having this discussion now, to, raise these issues and concerns. It's, it may be possible to, I think that this suggestion here is actually coming from our Secretary Cornett, who I believe is heavily interested in this information. But, we could always throw in something that says like, geospatial data to the extent it's not, protected or restricted by some other, regulation or rule or whatever. Did that make sense?
I'm not sure how that would help, Tom, because all the assets that we're going to be writing into a site certificate are going to fall under that category.
I mean, it may not. I mean, that may totally exclude you from having to meet that requirement then.
Right. So just a heads up there, guys, to think about.
Yep. It's good. It's good to bring that up. Okay. Moving on. So yeah, this is maybe sort of a little bit related, but to the extent that things are in the hands of the department, that are subject to confidentiality arrangements, the expectation is we're already doing this, but just to make it clear, and by putting it in the rules, that information that is submitted as part of compliance that is subject to confidentiality agreements, that we would handle that material the same way we would handle any material, that was sort of, we look to the Oregon Public Records Law in terms of like what we are allowed to disclose versus what we were required to keep confidential. So if the information you're talking about would already be covered by Oregon's public records law, then that's sort of already taken into account. If it isn't, then we would have to look into that. So that is something that we will have to examine. But
Tom,
yeah, go ahead.
One more thing to add there, because DEQ is starting to do it on their YDO is the CIB or confidential information. And there's a form that we can fill out when that's sent, that has to be sent in. So that might be another thing to look at for sensitive data that we're exchanging with you guys for compliance.
So you would submit a form along with the data, and like basically that would indicate which of the documents you're submitting would be subject to that confidentiality.
Yeah.
I see. Okay, well, that's definitely, and that was, sorry, that was DQ.
DQ has it. I think it's a CBI, confidential business information.
Okay. Yeah, I'll have to look into that. Okay. So the next probably sort of more significant one has to do with incident notification. And this is certainly, you know, kind of maybe the most public thing facing component to all of this, which is making it clear, you know, how incidents should be handled and what type of information should be included when that information is sent to the department. And it's sort of hard to describe this without actually looking at the exact language, but, you know, I kind of didn't want to bring the, you know, draft language that we've been working on to this, because I definitely want this discussion to inform what that draft language will ultimately look like. So, but yeah, the goal here is to make incident notification easier to understand about exactly what needs to be submitted. Anybody have any thoughts about what they're concerned about not being included or that should be included that we're not currently asking for? And I put a concern there on the slide. Obviously, we're always sensitive to, you know, sort of increasing the regulatory burden by asking for more stuff. But the idea here is that we sort of, you know, when there's an incident, we've sort of noticed that we are finding ourselves needing to ask for more stuff to understand these incidents. So we're sort of expecting people to ultimately give us that information anyway. And it just makes more sense to have that in the rules so that we don't, you know, people have a better sense of what they need to submit. Yeah. In the beginning.
I have a couple questions
Sure.
on that. When it says expand incident types, do you have an idea of what types of incidents would be expanded, or is it to more specifically kind of list the memo that was sent out in the 2022 timeframe to get those incidents?
I think this is to correlate this with that 2022 memo. And the most glaring omission that we would be adding is spills. It seems to be the most frequent negative event that's been occurring that's sort of not mentioned once in the rules.
So even though there's site certificate conditions that require reporting the spills, it's not actually in the rules leading to that site certificate condition.
So we have, yeah, exactly. It's a condition, but it's not, contemplated as an event in the rules themselves. So yeah, there's sort of some confusion here, and it's going to be an issue with rule applicability that sort of related to what I was talking about at the beginning with sort of being sensitive to how retroactive we make this. But you know, some of what we're doing is replicated verbatim in some of these site certificates, some of the compliance rules. So if we change the rules, like, you know, what would govern, and to the extent that we've sort of been using the site certificate to advance the compliance, to grow or like progress the compliance program without actually modifying the rules, we're sort of maybe doing a little catch-up work here by having the compliance rules catch up to what we're sort of already asking people to do. I don't know if that made sense.
The other thing I'd say on that is keeping in mind, you know, at least for PG, we recognize like the 72 hours, like notification has to happen quick. We might not have had time to research a lot of the information. So the increased reporting burden, I could just like think about how much of that is in that 72-hour or immediate notification and how much of that is like in a later report, and not making the rules so restrictive on what you're expecting in the initial notification that it's hard to be in compliance with.
It's a great point.
To further that, that was one of my points I was going to make. And the second one was just making sure, the whole duality, if there's DEQ or other response mechanisms too, or depending on the substance, could even be a federal, that we're just mindful of that as we're going along. I'd have to get my experts to go through the matrix of which have overlapping requirements, but yeah, just that's my only other thing to consider.
I would second David's comment there that you need to really look at the other spill response thresholds for spills that DEQ and EPA have, and when we do need to report to them and when we don't. If you're asking to report all spills, that may be quite burdensome for us, and we're not reporting to those other entities for all spills. There's thresholds that are associated with those depending on what's being spilled.
Yeah, I don't think the draft rules that we're considering are that extreme, but I mean, I guess you'll see when we circulate them in a couple of weeks. Yeah, I mean, that is it's good to consider, avoiding unintended consequences, because definitely when you're drafting something, it's very easy, I'm not having to deal with the spills. I don't work for Northwest Natural and or PGE. So yeah, not inadvertently sort of adding requirements that do more or create a larger burden than was intended. So that is something to consider. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I would just say ultimately the goal here is less work, not more. So if we're asking for more stuff, maybe it's things we're already asking for in, the 2026 version of our what we're handing out with site certificates and what we're expecting with the compliance requirements and mandatory conditions. And this is really just I think just an effort to true up our rules to sort of reflect what we've evolved to understand is important and relevant in terms of information we need to have an effective compliance program. Okay. Yeah, this is a real minor one. This is just adding some language, clarifying that the ODO inspection is, because right now it's pretty broad, the way it's written in Rule 51E, sort of tightening that up to make it clear that we only care about stuff that's tied to the site certificate. So, I mean, to the extent that it seems like it's outside that realm, it's only because that other stuff is directly related to the site certificate itself. But yeah, I don't think this one's too controversial. Okay, and then kind of the last one here is trying to improve our non-compliance process. So, right now it's sort of like, are you in compliance or aren't you in compliance? If you're not in compliance, what do? We can just issue a notice of violation or not. That's the way things are laid out. So DEQ, speaking of DEQ again, has a sort of graduated process that allows for things to escalate so they don't go from 0 to 100, with like warning letter, and then, then deadlines, and then sort of pre-enforcement notice that results in formal enforcement action. Yeah, just so we have a kind of graduated process that reflects the complexity of these issues in terms of what it would take to actually resolve them. It's not like, hey, you left the lights on, the garage door's open, somebody shut the garage door. So obviously these can be very complex, and so having a sort of more robust process to reflect that. Any thoughts about this. I mean, we're basically, I think the proposal is to literally just copy what DEQ is already doing, or there's sort of how they have that laid out. So I don't know how familiar you are with that process, but yeah. All right. Uh, let's see. That basically covers everything. So I think hopefully you have a sense of kind of the scope of what we're trying to do with this rulemaking. Um, it's not, we're not, this isn't a radical, shift or change. We have, for those of you who are not aware, we have gone from one compliance officer to three. One of those officers is actually here with us today, Hannah, who's been listening in. And so we've really been trying to, we have the resources now to do things that we haven't done before. Um, you know, it was kind of hard to do with just one person managing compliance for every single energy facility in the state of Oregon. But yeah, again, the goal is, what's reasonable, what's practicable. We're not going to, the intent is not to ask for things that are, you know, end up in a file somewhere, nobody ever looks at it, that sort of um, boilerplate type stuff that has no impact, doesn't protect anybody, doesn't protect health and resources in the state of Oregon, and just takes up time and effort. So, yeah, we want to be laser focused on using our resources to only care about the stuff that matters, and create a system and a process that allows us to use our resources in the best way possible so that we can monitor all of the large number of facilities, um, and that ultimately means that efficiency is important for us, and efficiency translates to, I think, lower regulatory burden, because if you've got to do more, then we have to do more to sort of make sure that people are doing what we've asked them to do. So yeah, we are definitely sensitive to that. Before I switch it over to, I don't think there's any members of the public, but I will give us a minute or two, or a minute, I guess. But before we switch over, just wanted to make sure, as we close out on a discussion of the preliminary issues list here, if anybody has any additional thoughts on any topics that come to mind that were not raised at the first rack and that were not identified by staff that we've just gone through. And this isn't your last opportunity to raise any issues, but just if anything's come to mind as we've discussed these other issues, like, oh yeah, with this one other thing.
Tom,
Yes.
this is Anne. Just wanted to thank everybody for their comments. I think getting the comments in on these issues early on and helping us avoid tripping over other agency requirements is really helpful. The confidential business information bit is important. And again, the goal of the compliance program is compliance, not penalizing and that kind of thing. It's really just ensuring compliance with the conditions. So thanks for all the comments. And as Tom said, as you think of other issues or want to clarify things, this is a good time.
Yes. So, I mean, 100% to everything Councilmember Byer just said. Gonna give it
I'll just
30. Oh yeah, go for it.
yeah, thanks. I like the note on efficiency, and I, at least from somebody that has or been part of a company that's built and had issues, as we all do as we're moving forward and getting really having those additional resources has been valuable for us as well. So just and so as we tweak, hopefully tweak the efficiency of it, it makes for a more robust and better program. I just wanted to
Yeah.
state that out front. And so looking forward to seeing how we can continue to help.
Awesome. Thank you, David. Sarah, go ahead.
I just had a quick question. So, this rulemaking covers Division 26, 28, and 29. Is that right?
Well, the way it was
Or
initially,
no, there is no 28, sorry. It's Division 26 and 29. I guess my question is, could it also include 25, which is the mandatory conditions and site certificates, to the extent that's, those are conditions that developers have to comply with that
I
would
mean,
greatly benefit from an overhaul?
I think the scope was things that are related to compliance. So I know that a lot of what we do is sort of interconnected. Definitely to the extent it sort of directly relates and is significantly you know, related to or could be improved as a sort of like operational improvement to our compliance program. I think it's within the scope. But I am, sort of sensitive to that. I mean, ultimately, I guess it comes down to, take a look at it, see what you would want to do, and then ask yourself, is that related to compliance?
Yeah.
I mean, there
Okay.
definitely is overlap in that a lot of compliance is related to mandatory conditions, but yeah. I'll step
Yeah,
right
I mean,
into
it seems like it fits just from the perspective of, as I think Lena brought it up, but in both 26 and 29, we have, or the council has imposed as conditions, rule requirements from 26 and 29. And then of course, 25, we impose verbatim. So from that perspective, it's all, and we're proposing to tweak language then that would affect conditions where we've done that. So, I mean, opening up Division 25 in that way would have a bigger implication of effect, having rule-based conditions that are now inconsistent with 30 site certificates, but that would just have that retroactive clause or
Sure.
something.
So I guess what I would say to that is it's going to tie into this slide here on next steps. So I'm going to ask as I if anybody has any additional concerns or ideas about how to improve the compliance rules based on today's discussion, and preferably, I mean, even if you have draft language, obviously you can just wait for our own draft language, but if you have specific ideas about, phrases or clauses that you think would be helpful to include, sending them now would be ideal, but you can also just share any other thoughts, ideas, or you can wait to see, as many people like to do, wait and see what we come up with before you want to provide your critiques. I would say, given what Sarah just said, include take a look at Division 25 in your review, and see if there's anything regarding mandatory conditions that could be changed or improved that would directly affect what we would want to, how we would want to either remove or add or amend the languages in the compliance division. And I would say, if to the extent that that's the case, it would be within scope of this rulemaking. And then, so I'm actually going to be out of the country for half of March. So I would say if you could get me your feedback prior to mid-March, that would be ideal. And then we'll schedule our next RAC meeting for sometime in April, mid-April, probably. Give me time to actually work, get the feedback and update our draft language. And then, assuming that everyone we haven't had too many contentious discussions here, as sometimes we do with RACs. So it's very possible that our next meeting we sort of go over the draft language and that's it, and we wrap this up, which is fine. So if we feel like we need to have another meeting or another meeting would be helpful, we certainly can schedule one. But I would anticipate that we have one more and that's it. But that of course means you still have the opportunity to provide additional feedback during the public comment period if the draft language we ultimately propose to council is not exactly what you're hoping it would be. So yeah, always keep that in mind. And then I guess any questions, feel free to submit them to me at my email address, tom.jackman@energy.oregon.gov. And I will leave you with that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.
Good
Yep.
job.
Thank
Yep.
you.